The Americans might describe President Zelensky's visit to Washington on Tuesday as something of a Hail Mary, a last-ditch attempt to try and move the needle on that $60 billion of military aid that is so badly needed at the front. The trouble is, before he'd even left the US Capitol, it was clear that the president's efforts had failed. I admire him, said Republican Senator Lindsey Graham, but he didn't change my mind at all about what we need to do. And this was the response of the House Speaker, Mike Johnson.
We needed clarity on what we're doing in Ukraine and how we'll have proper oversight of the spending of precious taxpayer dollars of the American citizens, and we needed a transformative change at the border. Thus far, we've gotten neither. I've told the National Security Advisor, the Secretary of State, the Secretary of Defense, that these are our conditions because these are the conditions of the American people, and we are resolute on that.
President Zelensky would have expected that type of reaction. He's pretty astute when it comes to American politics. But what would have been more concerning would be the language of President Joe Biden.
Ukraine will emerge from this war proud, free, and firmly rooted in the West unless we walk away. We'll continue to supply Ukraine with critical weapons and equipment as long as we can.
As long as we can, not as long as it takes. That is a small but highly significant change in emphasis and a sign that perhaps the Republicans are winning the argument. That will be warmly welcomed in Moscow, of course. The Kremlin is already renewing its offensive. A wave of missile strikes hit the capital, Kyiv, last night. Ukrainian officials say at least 53 people were injured. The country's air defence has intercepted many of those missiles, but falling debris damaged homes, a children's hospital, and also set fire to cars around it. The Air Force says it also shot down attack drones in the Odessa region. From Kyiv, our correspondent Jessica Parker sent us this update.
I'm standing in a children's playground in the Dniprovsky district of Kyiv, but part of it has been totally destroyed. Let me show you some of what we can see here. First of all, you'll see a group of people just here, and there's a massive crater in the ground. That must have been the point of impact from last night's blast. And then look up at the apartments, windows blown out everywhere. Some of those flats have been completely destroyed, others very badly damaged. They're doing what they can to try and make those buildings structurally safe, or the site as safe as possible. And then also, just look over here, there is a burnt out car. Now what we're told is it was actually parked near the apartment blocks, but the force of the blast blew it over here right into the middle of the children's playground. We've been speaking to residents. Clearly many of them are having to find somewhere else to stay. Some have family and friends they can go to. Others are going to go to a school that is being provided as a temporary shelter. One man I spoke to, Alexander, he got very visibly upset when we were talking because he said he had seen some of his neighbours' children injured following last night's missile attack, and he also called, as I spoke to him, for continued Western support. That, of course, as President Zelensky has been in Washington, D.C. to try and unlock a $60 billion package of military aid, but so far has failed to break the deadlock.
Indiscriminate bombing of civilian areas. Let's speak to Andrei Zagorodnyuk. He is the former Minister of Defence in Ukraine. Andrei, it's always good to have you on the programme. Thank you, for sparing us some time. I look at those pictures that Jessica was showing us there, and I know that so many of the missiles are brought down by Western-supplied air defences. How much of that do you have left, and what happens if it runs out?
Well, of course, the military doesn't say how much they have left, but certainly the indications is that they're not like infinite. And certainly Kyiv is the most protected city. I have to say that it was a night before the last, and I've heard these rockets myself. I haven't seen them because it was late at night, but you could very clearly hear them. It's basically like a Boeing plane flying over your head, and then exploding with their defense interception. It's very difficult to imagine what could be the devastations and destructions if these are not intercepted.
I said that President Putin was taking advantage. Does it feel to you there in Ukraine that there has been a step change in the Russian offensives because of what is happening in Washington?
No, not at the moment. We clearly see that President Zelensky is trying to basically bring back U.S. politicians to like a common sense. Mm-hmm. And Russia is certainly using that moment in media. You know, they're kind of they sort of developing that mode of sort of desperation and momentum. Of course, if the assistance is continued, then all of that sort of wanes. And I think that we will have some kind of a way out with U.S. politicians out of this, because clearly we have majority in both parties. But at the moment, they're playing their political sort of process games, and essentially Ukraine really risks of having the stockpiles of the ammunition diminished, and that's a real risk.
There is reporting, I'm sure you're aware of it, in the New York Times that the White House is trying to push President Zelensky to a different strategy. Instead of fighting for every inch of Ukraine, they want him to focus, the report says, on the industrial areas, on the sea to get the grain out, and on protecting Kyiv. With that in mind, was that a slip of the tongue from the president yesterday, as long as we can, or do you think that was in reference to what the New York Times is reporting?
I think it won't. I wouldn't really sort of overanalyze this, and it might be a slip of the tongue. Generally speaking, the whole rhetoric of current White House administration is that they need to continue, they need to push this through, and so on and so on. But at the moment, of course, they cannot, because they have this blocked in the Congress. But we don't see changes in the strategy of the administration. There could be a debate about the operational plans of like a winter campaign, but there is no strategic change at all.
Ron DeSantis, who of course is running in the Republican primaries and is very much, I think, in line with how President Trump thinks of the Ukraine issue, he said last night that his priority is Israel, and it was incumbent on the Europeans to do more to protect Ukraine. If the Republicans were to get in, do you think that the Europeans have put themselves on enough of a war footing to be able to sustain the war in Ukraine, or have they just not done enough?
No, they obviously haven't put on the war footing. There's been a substantial, there's been a lot of discussions about the, upscaling the industrial capacity, making more ammunition, making more of the guns and so on. But at the moment, we don't see those massive dramatic changes in Europe yet. I think it's coming. I mean, there is a significant recognition of the threats in Europe, so they actually do this, but I don't think they're doing this even according to the plans they had. So yes, we'll have a substantial issues if the US is out. It's not like Ukraine is going to lose, and it's not like Russia is going to completely win, because Ukraine will fight with whatever we have.
But what does it do to morale on the front, though, Andrei?
At the moment, this is not impacting frontline today. People do understand that there is a political issues, but we've already been through the times when the West was saying, okay, Ukraine's going to disappear in 72 hours, and we're still here and we're still fighting, and Russians. By the way, just yesterday, United States published that we have either killed or made wounded, so basically incurred the casualties to 90% of a Russian army which they had before the invasion. 90%. So certainly when somebody is saying that Ukraine fails to kind of with counteroffensive or fails to win, they need to remember that we destroyed 90% of the original Russian army, which was like a third largest army in the world. And this is US official data, so it's not even us saying that. So we are going to progress. The thing is that every time when US politicians are delaying that, it means more casualties, perhaps among the civilians, but certainly among the military personnel, which could have been avoided every single day.